I'd like to thank my subscriber Jib for recommending this horrifying case. Anyway, on with the video. Wednesday the 13th of March 1996 was any other school day at Dunblane Primary School in Dunblane, near Stirling in Scotland, but all that changed just after 9:30 AM when Thomas Hamilton, a 43-year-old paedophilic loner, walked into the school with 4 handguns and began firing. In less than 5 minutes, he murdered 17 people, including 16 children, with the oldest being 6 years old, in a case of mass murder which shocked the country and which has become known as the Dunblane Massacre. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Thomas Hamilton was born on the 10th of May 1952 in Glasgow, Scotland. He had a confusing childhood, with him finding out that his older sister Agnes was in fact his mother, and that the people he thought were his parents were in fact his grandparents, and that his real father had abandoned him when he was only 18 months old. How this affected Hamilton is unclear, but I think that it's reasonable to assume that it led to a lifelong mistrust of others and perpetual anger about his lot in life. Hamilton grew up to be an unpleasant, petulant man, described as, quote, a loner and, quote, weirdo by those who knew him. He appeared to have 2 obsessions: clubs attended by young boys and guns. With regards to the former obsession, Hamilton was heavily involved in the Scout movement in Scotland from a young age, and by his early 20s was a Scout leader. However, in 1974, aged 22, he was removed from this position due to concerns about his behaviour around the boys in his charge. This initially doesn't seem to have been sexual in nature, but more his reckless disregard for their welfare. It appears that the incidents which led to him being removed from the Scouts were 2 weekend trips in 1974, where Hamilton lied and said that he had booked a hostel for him and 8 boys to stay at. However, in fact the children had slept in Hamilton's van in extremely cold conditions. However, nothing was ever Hamilton's fault, and any time he was disciplined or removed from a position, he would gripe to the authorities, writing long letters to anyone who would listen about how hard done by he was. Hamilton was undeterred and set up his own, quote, boys' clubs. He would hire out halls at various schools in and around the Dunblane area for activities. Each club would see 50 to 70 boys attending. It was here that there were significant concerns about Hamilton's behaviour around these children, with him apparently telling the boys to take their shirts off under the guise of wishing to observe their physical fitness levels. Hamilton would also run summer camps, where it's claimed that he would encourage the boys to walk around naked and rub suntan lotion into his body. Hamilton would also take pictures of the boys when they were bare-chested, and apparently made no attempts to hide his behaviour, with people who peered in the window of Hamilton's property noticing these pictures hung all over his wall. Whilst Hamilton was never prosecuted for any offences, police received at least 10 complaints about his behaviour towards these young boys and his attention towards them. Hamilton seemed obsessed with being around young male children, and so, as each one of his clubs was shut down due to concerns, he would simply ask another local authority for permission to set up somewhere else. Between 1981 and 1996, Thomas Hamilton ran at least 20 of these so-called boys' clubs. This behaviour, coupled with his possessing these pictures of children, leave me in no doubt that Thomas Hamilton was a paedophile who had a sexual interest in young male children. Hamilton was extremely litigious, and every time an allegation was made about him, he would begin bombarding councils and MPs with letters stating how everyone was slandering him and how unfairly he was being treated. However, remember, this is a man who's claiming that all accusations are malicious, but you could see pictures of shirtless boys on his wall if you went to his house. It's clear that Hamilton was a man who expected everything his way. He wants to be around young boys for his own sexual gratification and would not accept anyone trying to stop him. He couldn't give a shit about the welfare of the children or the fact that parents were trying to protect their children. No, Thomas Hamilton believed he was entitled to act in any way he wanted. Clearly, he saw nothing wrong with his behaviour. Behind closed doors, Hamilton was also a monster and a bully towards his own family members. It was revealed after the massacre that he would bully and abuse his ageing grandfather, regularly shouting at him and urinating in his drinks, taking great pleasure in torturing the man. It appears that everyone in Hamilton's world was just there for him to use and abuse, and nothing was standing in his way. And there was one incident which epitomised how he dealt with people who challenged him. Specifically, in the early 90s, a mother of one of the children at his clubs had gone to the police to complain about his behaviour. Hamilton stopped outside the woman's house and confronted her, saying that he'd heard that she'd called him a pervert. Hamilton then pulled a gun from under his seat, pointed it at her, and said it was loaded. The Dunblane Massacre led to a crackdown on the possession of handguns in the UK, but before this incident, certain handguns were legal to privately own, and Hamilton was obsessed with collecting and displaying his collection of firearms. 4 of these weapons he would use on the day of the murders. Hamilton would apparently talk to his guns, cooing over them as if they were children. I think guns represented power to Hamilton and made him feel less like a sad little man. So, you had a recipe for disaster. You had a man who was obsessed with guns, had a perverted fascination with small children, and a persecution complex against a society that he saw was getting in the way of what he rightfully thought he was entitled to. In the years leading up to the massacre, Hamilton's complaints to everyone and anyone who would read them were becoming more frequent and unhinged, and it's clear he was becoming more angry and more unstable. Hamilton also appeared to be blaming the rumours about him, rather than his own behaviour, on his kitchen fitting business suffering. Word to the wise, if you want people to let you into their home to fit a kitchen, stop taking pictures of their children. In early 1996, Hamilton was again sending more deranged letters to various people complaining about his apparent persecution, and it's in these communications that his specific disdain for Dunblane Primary School is revealed. In a letter written to a member of the local education authority in January 1996, Hamilton wrote, quote, "At Dunblane Primary School, where teachers have contaminated all the older boys with this poison, even former cleaners and dinner ladies have been told by teachers at the school that I am a pervert. There have been reports at many schools of our boys being rounded up by staff, and even warnings given to entire schools by head teachers during assembly." One of his last letters, sent on March 7th, 1996, just 6 days before the massacre, was sent to Queen Elizabeth, with Hamilton again moaning about how persecuted he was. The letter concludes with the following paragraphs, quote, "I have been involved with the organisation of boys' sports clubs for over 20 years, and the rumours circulated by officials of the Scout Association have now reached epidemic proportions across Central Region. As well as my personal distress and loss of public standing, this situation has also resulted in loss of my business and ability to earn a living. Indeed, I cannot even walk the streets for fear of embarrassing ridicule. All of this and more has been caused by the maladministration of the Scout Association and their denial of natural justice and duty of care. To some Scout officials, it was simply a ruse to oust a rival group. I turn to you as a last resort and am appealing for some sort of intervention in the hope that I may be able to regain my self-esteem in society. I am your obedient servant, Thomas W. Hamilton." I'm not sure what's more delusional, the fact that Hamilton couldn't see any issue with his behaviour and thought it was just a way for them to get rid of a, quote, rival, or the fact that he thought that he was that important that Queen Elizabeth would intervene. However, aside from writing letters, evidence was uncovered after the massacre which indicated that Hamilton may have been planning his crimes for 2 years before he acted. In particular, there was some evidence that Hamilton had been interrogating the children at his clubs about the layout and the timetable at Dunblane Primary School, and in particular which times and days had occurrences where the most number of children were gathered in one place. From these inquiries, Hamilton learned that on Wednesdays there was a school assembly, and then the Year 1 children, aged 5 to 6 years old, went straight to their PE class at the gym, with him finding out the location of this room. It's clear that Hamilton was planning an event which, in his twisted mind, would punish society for trying to stop him from indulging his sick sexual attraction to small boys. At 8:40 a.m. on the 16th of March 1996, Thomas Hamilton was seen scraping ice off his van. This was the last sighting of him prior to his rampage. Hamilton then loaded the van with 4 handguns, including 2 9mm Browning HP pistols and 2 .357 Magnum revolvers. He also brought with him 743 rounds of ammunition and ear protectors. At 9:30 a.m, Hamilton parked his van near to a telegraph pole and cut the wires, I assumed to stop calls to the police. He then armed himself and walked around to the front of the school. This map shows his route. It's clear that he knew exactly where he was going, with his ultimate destination being the gym at the back of the school. In the gym, just starting their PE lesson, was teacher Gwen Mayer and her 28 Year 1 pupils, aged between 5 and 6 years old. Also in the room were PE teacher Eileen Harold and Mhairi Blake, a teaching assistant. When Hamilton reached the gym, he began to fire rapidly and randomly aiming at anything that moved. Eileen Harold and Mhairi Blake were both shot, but they survived and managed to barricade themselves in a store cupboard with several wounded children. Gwen Mayer was shot and killed instantly whilst trying to protect the children. Hamilton fired 29 shots, killing 1 child instantly and wounding several others. He then fired another 14 shots before approaching wounded children and firing 16 point-blank shots into them. An 11-year-old pupil was walking around the outside of the gym when he heard screaming and loud bangs. The child looked in and Hamilton fired at him, missing him, but the child was injured with flying glass before he ran away. Hamilton then fired 24 shots in various directions, including targeting people who were walking or running past. Hamilton then left the gym and fired another 4 rounds towards the library, hitting and injuring another member of staff. Hamilton was standing in an area surrounded by classrooms, and he fired 9 bullets into a room of 11-year-olds who were cowering on the floor with their teacher. 1 bullet hit a chair where a child had been sitting just seconds before. Hamilton then walked back into the gym, took out one of the revolvers he was carrying, put it in his mouth, and pulled the trigger, killing himself instantly. The massacre lasted between 3 to 4 minutes, during which time Hamilton had fired approximately 100 rounds of ammunition, which killed 1 adult and 15 children instantly, with a further one dying on the way to hospital. He also injured 15 others, the majority of these being children. Emergency services were on the scene quickly, and those who could be saved were rushed to hospital. The news spread quickly, and terrified parents descended on Dunblane Primary School, hoping that their children were not amongst the dead. I cannot imagine the horror that the emergency services must have witnessed on that day, and the devastation of the parents of these children, who had likely only seen them an hour before, and were having to come to terms with the fact that their angels had been murdered in a place they should have felt completely safe. I want to talk about the victims of this horrific event, but refuse to mention the name of this piece of shit in the section where I'm going to do this. I refuse to sully their memory by mentioning his name in any sentence where I mention theirs, so I'm doing this bit first. I've already outlined the broad strokes of the man I believe Thomas Hamilton was: a paedophile, narcissist, who believed he should be allowed to do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. A deranged, self-absorbed loser whose one benefit to society was removing himself from it. Weirdly, I misspelt the word narcissist when writing this script, and the spelling suggestion was Antichrist. I wouldn't disagree with this characterisation. Hamilton clearly believed that society needed to pay for how they'd apparently treated him, and he targeted children, I believe, knowing full well that there is no greater loss to a parent than losing their child, and this was his twisted way at getting back at society, by murdering children who had done nothing to him, had no idea who he was, and who had barely started their lives. There is something so evil and psychopathic in Hamilton's actions, with him knowing full well that there would be defenceless 5- and 6-year-old children in that gym, and planning their slaughter, including standing over them while they were injured and shooting them at point-blank range. Thomas Hamilton was a coward, shown not only by his actions but also by the fact he killed himself. This seems to be the eventual actions of most mass shooters, and I believe it's the ultimate fuck you to society. It's them saying, look at what I've done, and now I'm going to leave you without any answers and no peace. I go out on my terms. The truth is, these cowards are too weak to take responsibility for their actions, knowing they could not justify the unjustifiable and would rot in prison, reviled by society. I'm not overly religious, but for Hamilton, I hope there is a hell, and he will be tormented for the rest of eternity. Please feel free to give me your thoughts on the mind and motivations of Thomas Hamilton. The nation was in shock as a result of the massacre at Dunblane Primary School, and it understandably dominated the headlines for weeks. Changes were made quickly in the aftermath, including a ban on private ownership of handguns, and the gym where the children and their teachers died was torn down. I remember the day this happened, and the days afterwards. Although I was only young, I knew that this was something really bad, an example of pure evil. I remember specifically that there was a prayer published in one of the newspapers with all the names of the children and their teacher that died, and I said that prayer every day for months afterwards, hoping that God would hear me. I don't remember all of it, but 26 years later, I still recall how it ended, with it saying, "Safe with Jesus, safe above, please accept our nation's love." Now, as I did back then, I want to say each of their names, and I want to show you pictures of each of them, showing you the beautiful children they were, so that they are remembered. Gwen Mayer, aged 45 years old, the teacher who tried to protect her children. Abigail McLellan, age 5. Victoria Clydesdale, age 5. Sophie North, age 5. Ross Irvine, aged 5. Mhairi MacBeath, aged 5. Melissa Curry, aged 5. Megan Turner, aged 5. Kevin Hassell, aged 5. John Petrie, aged 5. Joanna Ross, aged 5. Hannah Scott, aged 5. Emma Crozier, aged 5. Emily Morten, aged 5. David Kerr, aged 5. Charlotte Dunn, aged 5. Brett McKinnon, aged 6 years old. I always feel humbled by the bravery of people who have suffered such unimaginable tragedy. How they do not simply curl into a ball and give up is entirely beyond me. I want to close this video by showing this short clip of the parents of Charlotte Dunn talking in 2015 about losing their daughter. Thank you for watching.
We came down here last year. Whilst we were down here, we just said, we've not seen Marcia for a while. Let's just go and surprise her at the school. In reception there is a picture of Charlotte, a memorial, in memory of Charlotte, and we were very touched by that. Sue was Charlotte's godmother. Yeah. The choir were practising because they were going up for their Christmas singing up at Mhairi. So she stopped the choir and just explained, this is Barbara and Martin, and everyone went, Charlotte's mum and dad. And we were so taken back, like 19 years down the line, those children weren't even thoughts in anyone's minds at that time. For them to know who we were just so amazed.
Beautiful poem, thank you.
In memory of Charlotte.
A memory of Charlotte.
Charlotte came to Cradley in 95, 96, and I was her reception teacher. So she was in my reception class. And obviously I had a teacher-pupil relationship with her, which was always special. At the end of the year, she left to go to Scotland, and I remember them bringing me a teddy bear as a goodbye gift. And then when she'd moved to Scotland, she continued to write to me and to the class, which was lovely, and sent down a picture of the whole class that must have been in the newspaper in Dunblane, you know, welcoming the new children to school. And she'd drawn around her face, she'd obviously used a little penny and drawn around her face. We exchanged a couple of letters, 2 or 3 letters, and then of course the sad news came that there'd been a shooting, and our head teacher at the time, Mr. Raybould, came into the staff room and said that there'd been this shooting in Scotland, and it was in Perthshire. And then the day after, Martin rang the school and spoke to us.
Charlotte loved Disney films as she was growing up, and at the time Lion King was her favourite when we lost Charlotte, unfortunately. So this tie is actually from that day, so the tie is actually over 20 years old. We do have the words at the side of her grave, Hakuna Matata, which means no worries for the rest of her days.
I think you just kind of learn to live with it. You don't think you particularly heal. Take each day as it comes, if I'm honest, even 20 years down the line. Good days, bad days, still. Something can happen and you know, strikes a memory or whatever, but I say, you just never forget, but it always will be with you, but you do just learn to live with it. And
one of the things I'm quite regularly say to people, there's a lot of people still out there far worse off than us. We've suffered a tragedy, but there are people out there that are worse off than us, and they're suffering, you know, daily, and they, you know, sometimes they have to watch their children die, and that's, to me, far worse than what we had to put up with. And some people are amazed by that, and some people are shocked by that. But no, I mean, what happened to us was evil. But no, there's other people out there who suffer far more than ourselves.